Okay, so picture this. About 500 years ago, one single idea just completely ripped through the Christian world. It challenged the very structure of the church as everyone knew it. It's called the priesthood of all believers. And honestly, it's a concept that still sparks debate and inspires people today. So let's dive in and unpack what this is all about. This entire story really boils down to one single, powerful question. Is being a priest a special job reserved for just a select few? Or is it a calling that's meant for everyone? The answer to that question would end up igniting one of the most significant debates in the history of Christianity. All right, so to really get why this idea was so explosive, we need to do a little time travel. Let's go back to the late Middle Ages. Back then, the church, and society in general, was built on this super rigid hierarchy. Think of it like a series of watertight compartments, where everyone had their specific place and you didn't really cross over. And in that world, it was pretty much the accepted truth that a real vocation, a genuine calling to holiness, was something reserved for the clergy. Priests, bishops, monks, nuns, they were the spiritual professionals. All spiritual power was seen as flowing down from them, creating this massive gap between the clergy and the average person. Your path to God, it almost always had to go through an ordained intermediary. And then along comes Martin Luther, and he just starts taking a sledgehammer to that wall. In 1520, he writes to the nobility of the German nation, and in it, he argues that all Christians, doesn't matter if you're a prince or a cobbler, belong to the exact same spiritual estate. Later that same year, he drops the real bombshell. Omnes sacerdotes. We are all priests. I mean, this was absolutely radical stuff, and he didn't stop there. By 1523, he's even laying out how, in principle, any Christian could preach, baptize, and give communion. See, for Luther, the foundation of priesthood wasn't some special ceremony. It was the sacrament of baptism that every Christian shared. He argued that through baptism, every single Christian becomes a priest. That means you get direct access to God, you have the ability to teach, to pray, to offer spiritual sacrifices for other people. The middleman was suddenly no longer required. Luther used this brilliant analogy to explain the role of a pastor. He said, okay, imagine you have 10 of a king's sons. They're all equal heirs, right? They're all entitled to the same inheritance. Now, if they choose one person from their group to kind of administer the inheritance for them, to preach and lead worship, that person isn't suddenly superior. They're just a delegate, an equal chosen to do a specific job for the good of the whole community. As you can imagine, Luther's ideas sent massive shockwaves through the church. A response wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. And boy, did it come. It came in the form of one of the most important councils in Catholic history, the Council of Trent. And this wasn't just about rejecting Luther's ideas. It was about the church digging in its heels, defending and clarifying its own very different understanding of what a priest is. So at Trent, the church laid out its position on what we call the ministerial priesthood. The belief here is that the sacrament of holy orders creates a fundamental, ontological change in a man. That's a fancy way of saying it alters his very being. This change configures him to Christ in a totally unique way, and it gives him a sacred power that the laity just doesn't have, like the power to consecrate the Eucharist and to forgive sins in God's name. And here you can really see the two views in stark contrast. For Luther, a pastor is just a Christian whose job or function is different from other Christians. But for Trent, no way. A priest is part of a visible and external priesthood that was set up by God himself, and he has a sacred power that is fundamentally different from everyone else. So this isn't just a simple disagreement about roles. This is a profound difference in how you see the very structure of the church. And the Council of Trent did not mince words. They declared that if anyone says all Christians are priests in the same way, then you're doing nothing less than trying to disarrange the ecclesiastical hierarchy, a structure they firmly believed was instituted by God. It was a direct, forceful, and deeply felt defense of the traditional order against what they saw as a very dangerous new idea. So for centuries, these two positions were just locked in opposition. It created this deep theological chasm. But then, you fast forward to the 20th century, and a new conversation starts to happen, one that was actually aimed at building a bridge between these two worlds. I mean, just let this sink in for a moment. 400 years. That's how much time passed between the Council of Trent and this new dialogue. 4 whole centuries of division and, frankly, a lot of mutual suspicion. That context really highlights just how historic and significant this new development was. And that next big step was the Second Vatican Council. better known as Vatican II. And in a really major shift, the Catholic Church went back and revisited the whole concept of the common priesthood of all the baptized. The goal this time wasn't just to reject it, but to really explore how these two priesthoods, the common and the ministerial, could actually coexist and relate to each other. The key to understanding the modern Catholic position really comes down to this one short but incredibly important Latin phrase from the Council. It says that the two priesthoods differ from one another, non tantum gradu sed essentia, not just in degree, but in their very essence. Now, this distinction between essence and degree is absolutely crucial. It means the two priesthoods aren't like, say, a sergeant and a general, just different ranks in the same army. No. The idea is that they are fundamentally different kinds of things. The common priesthood of all believers and the ministerial priesthood of the ordained, they both come from Christ, but they're designed to work together, each one in service of the other. So how does all this complex theology actually play out in the real world? For a really powerful modern example, we can turn to the teachings of Saint Josemaría Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei. His work is amazing because it not only kind of anticipated, but also really expanded on the vision of Vatican II. Escrivá's great insight was basically to take this idea of the common priesthood out of the church building and put it right into the middle of the street. He taught that ordinary Christians live out their priesthood not by trying to act like mini clerics, but by sanctifying the world from within. That means turning your job, your family life, your friendships, all of your day-to-day activities into a spiritual offering to God. And Escrivá used this really striking image to describe the relationship between the two priesthoods. He said, the ministerial priest should be like a carpet, so that his brothers and sisters, the laity, can tread softly. In his view, the priest's role is one of radical service. It's about supporting the common priesthood so that it can flourish out in the world, not about ruling over it. So, Escrivá's whole vision can be broken down into a few key points. First, there are no second-class Christians. Everyone is called to the same highest level of holiness. Second, he totally rejected clericalism, that tendency for priests to act like a separate, superior class. Third, he taught that a regular person's mission comes directly from Christ through baptism, not just handed down from the church hierarchy. And finally, he introduced this amazing idea that your daily life is an altar, where you can offer a mass which lasts 24 hours. So let's just recap this wild 500-year journey. We started with Luther, who rooted priesthood in baptism and saw the clergy as delegates. Then came the powerful response from Trent, which based priesthood on holy orders and saw priests as having a unique sacred power. And then, finally, we get the synthesis from Vatican II, which affirms both a common priesthood from baptism and a ministerial priesthood from holy orders, with the minister's role really being one of service. What's amazing is that what began as this fiery protest against a rigid hierarchy has, over 5 centuries, evolved into this really deep and nuanced conversation. It's become a dialogue about the dignity and the absolutely essential role that every single baptized person plays in the life and mission of the Church. And that really brings this whole conversation right back to our own lives. Because if the theologians are right, and our work desks and our kitchen tables and our daily commutes can all be altars, well, that leaves us with a final, pretty personal question. What are you offering on your altar today?